couch there with several woolen blankets. The lieutenant and the Asian push past me into the room. The lieutenant quickly pulls the door shut. Before it closes, I see him shining a torch. I'm standing in the kitchen, candle in hand. The Major is standing next to me in silence. He politely asks me where the bathroom is. I show him the door and hand him the candle. While I wait for him by the kitchen window, looking out into the dark, the door to the back room opens again. The surly blonde lieutenant, already in his undershirt, hisses at me, "About us, yesterday. Nobody needs to know about that." And then he's gone. I have to think a moment. What does he mean, about us? Then I remember the previous night. The dog's love is spitting next to my bed. It seems an eternity ago, repressed, nearly forgotten. I've lost all concept of time. A day is like a week, a gaping abyss between two nights. The Major is back. He goes with me into my room. By now, Pauli and the widow in the next room will have realized what's going on. I can hear their muffled voices through the wall. The Major pulls a tall, new candle out of one of his bags, drips some wax onto an ashtray, secures the candlestick, and places it on the little table next to my bed. He asks quietly, still holding his cap, "May I stay here?" I wave my hands and shrug my shoulders in signs of helplessness. At that he lowers his eyes and says, "You should forget the sub-lieutenant. By tomorrow he'll be far away. That's what I've heard." "And you?" "Me? Oh, I'll be here a long time, a very long time. At least another week, maybe even longer." He points to his leg. "There's a fragment inside. I'm being treated." I actually feel sorry for him, the way he's standing there. I ask him to sit down, take a seat. He answers awkwardly, "You must be tired. It's so late. Perhaps you'd like to lie down." And he moves over to the window of scraps and cardboard and acts as if he's looking outside, where you can no longer hear any sounds from the front, none at all. In a flash I take off my outer clothes, throw on an old robe that belongs to the widow, crawl into bed. Then he comes closer, pushes a chair next to the bed. What is he after? More conversation, more etiquette manual, see under "Raping Enemy Demoiselles." But no, the Major wants to introduce himself. He takes all his papers out of his pockets, spreads them on the quilt and moves the candle closer so that I can get a better look. This is the first Russian who's revealed himself that way, with all the details. I soon know his full name, date and place of birth, even how much he has in his bank account, because there's also a savings book from the city of Leningrad with over 4,000 rubles. Then he gathers up his papers. He speaks a sophisticated Russian. As always, I can tell by the fact that whole sentences go by without my understanding a word. He seems to be well read and quite musical, and he's clearly taking pains to behave like a gentleman even now. Suddenly he jumps up and asks nervously, "Is my company not pleasing? Do you despise me? Tell me frankly." No, not at all. You can go right on being the way you are. I just can't force myself into this role, to feel at ease so quickly. I have this repulsive sense of being passed from hand to hand. I feel humiliated and insulted, degraded into a sexual thing. And then once more the thought, and what if it's true? What if Anatole really has disappeared? What if my taboo is gone, this wall I've taken such trouble to erect? Wouldn't it be good to create a new taboo, one that might last a little longer? To build a new wall of defence? The Major takes off his belt and puts aside his jacket, all in slow motion with sideways glances at me. I sit, wait, feel my palms sweating. I want to help him, and I don't want to. Then suddenly he says, "Please, give me your hand." I stare at him. More etiquette manual? Is he trying to grace me with a kiss on my hand, or is he a palm reader? He takes my hand and clasps it firmly with both of his, then says, with pathetic eyes and trembling lips, "Forgive me. It's been so long since I had a woman." He shouldn't have said that. Next thing I know, I'm lying with my face in his lap, sobbing and bawling and howling all the grief in my soul. I feel him stroking my hair. Then there's a noise at the door. We both look up. The door is ajar. The widow is standing there holding a candle, asking anxiously what the matter is. The Major and I both wave her away. She undoubtedly sees that nothing bad is being done to me. I hear the door closing once again. A little later, in the dark, I tell him how miserable and sore I am and ask him to be gentle. He is gentle and slightly tender, is soon finished, and lets me sleep. That was my Tuesday, the 1st of May. On to Wednesday. For the first time in all these nights of men, I sleep into the morning, and when I wake up the Major is still by my side. Evidently he doesn't have any duties, he can make his own assignments. We talk a bit, very friendly and rationally. Out of nowhere he confesses to me that he is not a communist, not at all. He is a professional officer, trained at the military academy, and hates the young stool pigeons from the Komsomol. By which I understand him to mean that even higher-ranking officers have reason to be afraid of party watchdogs. I'm amazed at how openly he speaks to me. On the other hand, there are no witnesses. Then, just as abruptly, he wants to know if I really am healthy. You understand? I mean, you understand what I'm saying. The first "you" is formal. The second time he uses the familiar form. As a rule he mixes the two when he talks to me. So I tell him the truth, that I've never had anything like that, but of course I can't be sure that I haven't caught something from one of the Russians who violated me. He shakes his head and sighs. Ach, these hooligans. Pronounced hooligan, a loan word very common in Russian, used for scoundrels, louts, ruffians. He gets up, dresses and calls for his orderly, who waddles in, still in his stockinged feet, carrying his shoes. The lieutenant is nowhere to be seen. He is probably gone for the day. From the room next door I can hear the widow. Outside, the May morning is chilly. Chains are clinking, horses neighing, the rooster has long since crowed. But no katyushas, no gunfire, nothing. The Major limps around the room and stretches his leg, singing one song after the other in a beautiful voice, including the magical "Linger with me, my lovely one." Then he sits on the edge of the bed, pulls a little harmonica out of his pocket, and plays a march with amazing verve and skill. Meanwhile the Asian, who, when I ask, tells me he's from Uzbekistan, helps his superior put on his soft leather boots. Taking pains to spare the injured leg, he gazes adoringly at his musical major, and sighs in foreign-accented Russian, "Eh, is so beautiful." Later, after both are gone, the widow hears in the stairwell that Berlin surrendered around 4 a.m. Someone heard it on a crystal set. Peace. So we think and are happy. Until we find out that there is still fighting going on north and south of the city. Still Wednesday. The hours are creeping along. People are constantly interrupting me as I write. But no one has objected. The most I've heard was one soldier saying, "That's right, you all need to study hard and learn Russian." A steady stream of Russians, liquor, kitchen work, fetching water. We hear there's a wooden beam lying around somewhere. I rush to get it before someone beats me to it. 2 of Anatole's men come running out of the abandoned apartment they've commandeered for the past few days, carrying mattresses and bed covers. Where are they moving to? Not a trace of Anatole himself. Evidently the lieutenant wasn't lying. And the Major promised in parting that he would take good care of me, bring me something to eat. Fine with me. For days I've had misgivings about the butter Herr Pauli brought from the Volkssturm. This is definitely a different life from my hungry existence in the attic, where everything had been stripped bare and eaten. First we had the end of the German rations, then what I managed to steal, the loot from the police barracks, the potatoes. And the widow had a few stores of her own, potatoes, beans and peas, bacon. Next we had everything that Anatole and his men left in the way of bread, herring, pork rinds, canned meat, although the alcohol was always drained to the last drop, and the 2 cans of meat from the white hands of Stepan Aloysia. A life of plenty. Actually, I haven't eaten this richly in years. It's been months since I was so full of eating. It can't go on like this. But for the moment I'm stuffing myself to build up my strength. Outside it's cold and overcast. Today I stood at the pump for a long time in a fine rain. Little fires burning all around in the trampled gardens, men's voices singing to an accordion. A woman in front of me is wearing men's shoes. She has a scarf on her head covering half her face. Her eyes are swollen from crying. But for the first time since I've been standing in line for water, things are calm, no katyushas. The sky is still smouldering yellow. The previous night had been full of fires. But there's no more gunfire in Berlin. Things are quiet. We stand there in the pouring rain, speaking quietly and saying little. The pump creaks, the lever squeals. Russians fill canister after canister. We wait. The pathetic figure in front of me reports in monotone that no, she hasn't been raped yet. She and a few neighbours managed to lock themselves in the basement. But now her husband has come back from his unit, you understand, so she has to take care of him, hide him, find food and water for him. She can't just think about herself any more. And a dishevelled woman behind me is moaning about furniture. My good couch with the royal blue velvet. I had 2 matching armchairs. They broke them into pieces and used them for firewood. And finally a scrawny man, all bones, with a face no bigger than a fist, tells us a story about a family in his building who hid their daughter under the chaise longue. They pulled the cover all the way down to the floor, and the Russians even sat on it without any idea the girl was lying underneath. I can't tell whether the story is fact or fiction. It's entirely possible. Our lives are all rumours and melodrama, one big kitschy novel. I'm not in a position to hide, although I know of a hole in the attic I could crawl into, but I don't have anyone to bring me food and water. Once, when I was 9 years old, on vacation at my grandparents' house, I hid in the attic with my cousin Clara. We climbed into a corner beneath the straw dolls in the rafter, which were warm from the sun, and had a secret conversation about where babies came from. Clara, who was younger than me but knew more, whispered something about women being cut open with big knives so the babies could get out. I can still feel the horror that crept up my throat, until finally I was saved by our grandmother's sedate voice calling us for a snack. I clambered down the stairs and breathed a sigh of relief when I saw my grandmother in her satin apron, uncut and intact, broad and round as always, her metal-rimmed spectacles perched on the tip of her nose. The house smelled of coffee and apple cake, and I'm sure the cake was dusted with powdered sugar, though in those days a pound of that cost several million paper marks. As I chewed away, I forgot all about Clara's knives and my own fear. But these days I think children are right to be afraid of sexual things. There really are a lot of sharp knives. The Russians at the pump don't spend much time sizing up us water carriers. They've already caught on that it's mostly old, gnarled women who are sent to the pump. When I'm there, I too wrinkle my forehead, pull down the corners of my mouth and squint in order to look as ancient and wretched as I can. At first, before I started sticking out like a sore thumb, our Russian guests often asked me how old I was. If I told them I'd just turned 30, they would grin and say, "Aha, she's a sly one pretending to be older than she really is." Then I'd show my ID, and they had no choice but to believe me. They can't really tell with us. They are used to their Russian women, who have lots of children and are quickly worn out. They can't read how old our bodies are, even if most of us look miserable compared with how we looked in peacetime. A red-cheeked Russian walks down our line, playing an accordion, and calling out to us, "Hitler kaputt! Goebbels kaputt! Stalin ist gut!" He laughs and cackles one of their mother curses, slaps a comrade on the shoulder, and shouts in Russian, even though the people in line won't understand a thing, "Look at him, a Russian soldier, and he's marched from Moscow to Berlin." They are all so proud of their victory they're bursting their buttons. Even they're amazed that they made it this far. We swallow it all, stand in line, and wait. I come home with 2 buckets full of water. A new commotion inside the apartment. 2 soldiers we don't know are running through our rooms looking for a sewing machine. I show them our Singer in the kitchen. Ever since Petka, the bristle-haired Romeo, played catch with it, the machine seems a little bent. What do these 2 need a sewing machine for? It turns out they have a package they want to send to Russia. They'd like to have it sewn up in a cloth cover, which of course should be done by hand. With great eloquence, consisting mostly of repetition, I convinced the boys that current technology isn't up to the task, that this is more a job for grandmother's simple handiwork. Finally, they nod their round heads and agree. They're carrying a whole loaf of bread as payment. The widow thinks for a moment, and decides to pass this princely commission to the bookselling wife, who is skilled at sewing and short on bread. She hurries over to fetch her from her triply secured apartment. And the woman actually decides to come. She's mistrustful, hesitant, and at the same time eagerly considering the bread. She and her husband are living off beans and barley. She takes her place at the kitchen window and carefully sews white linen cloth around the bundle. The contents remain a mystery. It feels soft, probably clothes. I try to imagine what the Russians think about all these things lying around, unprotected and abandoned. There are deserted apartments in every building that are theirs for the taking. Basements with whatever is stowed in them. There's nothing in this city that isn't theirs if they want it. The problem is there's simply too much. They can no longer take it all in, this abundance. They nonchalantly grab whatever objects catch their eye, then lose them or pass them on. They haul things away and then discard them as soon as they become a burden. This is the first time I've seen them take the trouble to pack up and mail some of the plunder. For the most part, they have no ability to assess the value of things. They grab the first thing they see, and they have no concept of quality or price. Why should they? They've always just worn what they've been allotted. They don't know how to judge and choose, how to figure out what's good, what's expensive. When they steal bedding, for instance, they're just looking for something to lie down on right away. They can't tell eiderdown from shoddy. And what they value most of all is liquor. While she sews, the bookseller passes on what she knows. Yes, 18-year-old Stinchin is still being kept by her mother in the crawl space, lately during the day as well, ever since 2 Russians came back with the designated water carriers, burst into the apartment, brandished their pistols, and shot a hole in the linoleum floor. The girl looks pasty, no wonder, but at least she's still intact. The bookseller also tells about some new residents, 2 young sisters, one a war widow with a 3-year-old son. They moved into one of the empty apartments, where they carry on with the soldiers, sometimes by day, sometimes by night. Rumour has it things are very merry there. We also learn that a woman across the street jumped out of a 4th-story window when some Ivans were after her. She's buried in the little yard in front of the cinema. A number of people have apparently been buried there. I can't say, since I take a different path to get my water, and that's the only place you go outside these days. So the bookseller stitches away and recounts what she knows. Rumours. The goddess Fama. I've always pictured her as an old woman all shrouded up and murmuring away. Gossip. We feed on it. Years ago people got all their news through hearsay and word of mouth. It's impossible to overestimate how this affected ancient cultures, how unclear and uncertain their view of the world must have been. Spooky, nightmarish, a swamp of murmured horrors and fears, of malicious men and resentful gods. These days, too, there are times when I feel I can't be sure of anything, that nothing is true, that Adolf may have long ago escaped by submarine to Spain, and that Franco is putting him up in a castle where he's sketching plans for Truman about getting the Russians back to Russia. But one thing is beyond doubt: the deep-down feeling of defeat, the certainty of our being at the mercy of the victors. The two Russians come back, are very pleased with the sewing, take the package and give the woman her fresh bread. I talk with them and find out that neither one is actually an ethnic Russian. One comes from around Kuban and is of German descent. The other is a Pole from Lvov. The German is named Adams. His ancestors came from the Palatinate 200 years ago. The few German words he produces are in that local dialect. For example, es hat gebrannt, it burned, for es hat gebrennt. The Pole is strikingly handsome, with black hair and blue eyes, quick and lively. He breaks up a crate for our firewood and exchanges a few words with the widow, who as a child used to visit relatives on an estate in East Prussia, where she picked up a few phrases from the Polish field hands. He offers to go with me to get the water. I accept, though reluctantly. During my first trip this morning I discovered a poster by the door proclaiming that, effective immediately, Russians are no longer allowed to enter German homes or to fraternize with German civilians. We set off. I'm glad, because this way I'll save at least an hour of standing in line, since if a Russian does the pumping for me, I'll have priority. But no sooner are we outside than an officer calls out after my Pole, "Hey, you! What are you doing going with the German?" The Pole winks at me, hangs back, and meets up with me at the pump, where he serves himself ahead of everyone else. The people in line stare at me with bitterness and contempt, but no one says a word. The Pole has a violent temper. On the way home he picks a fight with some soldier over nothing, snorting and roaring and swinging his fists. Then a spasm runs through his entire body and he calms down, catches up with me, and points to the back of his head, explaining that he took a bullet there during the fighting at Stalingrad. Ever since then he's been prone to these rages and violent fits. He often has no idea what he does in his fury. He never used to be like that. I look at him, uneasy, and hurry ahead with my 2 buckets. He really does have the thick copper Stalingrad medal hanging from a colourful ribbon, wrapped in cellophane. I'm happy when we get to our building and he slips away. Clearly the new order won't take effect as long as their soldiers are billeted in abandoned apartments right next to our own. Thursday, 3rd of May, 1945, with the rest of Wednesday. Something comical. While I was at the pump with the Pole, the widow had a visit from Petka, my ex-rapist with the blonde bristle, the man who threw our sewing machine around. But he must have forgotten all about this drunken exploit. The widow says he was exceedingly friendly. He showed up lugging a beautiful yellow leather Petka-sized trunk that another man would have had trouble lifting. Spreading out the contents, mostly clothes, he indicated to the widow that she could take whatever she wanted, that everything was meant for her, while nothing was to go to me, as he made clear. But that was more for show than anything else. After all, what was to prevent the widow from giving me whatever she liked the minute he was gone? He had probably wanted to play Santa Claus for me, to snatch some more of what he calls love, one final hasty attempt because he let the widow know that his whole troop was moving on, and actually said farewell, do svidania. With a good deal of self-restraint, the widow declined Petka's largesse and sent him on his way together with his trunk. Not that she'd been plagued by moral scruples. Why should I be? After all, they carried off my trunk too, didn't they? And that from a woman of proper bourgeois breeding from a good German home. No, her reservations were of a purely practical nature. I can't wear those things. The trunk was obviously taken from one of the neighbouring buildings. If I went out with those clothes on, I'd risk running into their rightful owner. So she limited her take to 2 pairs of shoes. She couldn't resist, they were exactly her size. Brown street shoes, nondescript and easy to disguise with a little black polish, according to the widow. She wanted to give one of the pairs to me. Goodness knows I could use them, since the only shoes I have are the ones I'm wearing. Unfortunately, they're too small. The afternoon passed quietly. We didn't see any of our acquaintances, not Anatol or Petka, Grisha, Vanya, Yasha, or Andrei the schoolteacher. The Major, however, showed up promptly at sunset, along with his chubby Uzbek shadow, and someone else. Thank God, not the surly lieutenant with the hiking pole. No, this time it was a little red-cheeked boy in a blue sailor's suit, 18 years old, Soviet Navy. Apparently they've taken Berlin by sea as well. We certainly have enough lakes around. The sailor looks like a schoolboy. He smiles innocently from ear to ear as he tells me quietly he has a favour to ask. Please, go ahead. I call him over to the window, through which we can still smell the stench of burning. And then the little sailor asks politely, and very like a child, whether I would be so kind as to find a girl for him, a nice, clean girl, respectable and kind. He'd bring her food, too. I stare at the boy, trying not to laugh out loud. Isn't that the limit? Now they're demanding that their sexual spoils be tidy and well-behaved, and have a noble character to boot. Next thing, they'll be asking women to present a police affidavit testifying to their clean record before they're allowed to bed down with the victors. But this one just gazes at me with hopeful eyes, and looks so tender-skinned, so much like Mamma's little boy, that I can't be mad at him. So I shake my head with the proper regret, and explain to him that I haven't been living in the building very long, that I hardly know a soul, and that, sad to say, I don't know where he might find such a nice girl. He takes it all in, visibly disappointed. I have an urge to check behind his ears to see if he's still wet. But I know that even the most seemingly gentle Russian can turn into a savage beast if you rub him the wrong way or offend his self-esteem. I just want to know why they keep expecting me to play matchmaker. Probably because I'm the only one around who understands them when they say what they're after. My sailor boy held out his little paw to thank me, and then took off. But why are these youngsters so eager in their pursuit of anything female? At home they'd probably wait a little longer, though it's true that most of them marry earlier than our men. They probably want to prove themselves in front of their older comrades, like 16-year-old Vanya, the stairwell rapist, to show that they're real men too. Anyway, the unbridled raping sprees of the first few days are over. The spoils are now in short supply. I hear that other women have done the same thing I have, that they are now spoken for, and therefore taboo. The widow has more details concerning the two drink-and-be-merry sisters, evidently there for officers only, who don't take kindly to low-ranking poachers trespassing on their private preserve. As a rule, those who don't have marching orders in their pockets look for a more permanent arrangement, something exclusive, and they're prepared to pay. They've realised how badly off we are when it comes to food, and the language of bread and bacon and herring, their principal gifts, is internationally understood. As for me, the Major has brought all sorts of things. I can't complain. First, he brought a pack of candles under his coat. Then more cigars for Pauli. Next, the Uzbek showed up, heavily loaded down, and started pulling out one thing after another. A can of milk, a tin of meat, a side of bacon covered with salt and a lump of butter wrapped in cloth, at least 3 pounds of it, all smeared with tiny wool fibres that the widow picked out right away. Then, when we were sure nothing more was coming, he fished out a pillowcase filled with sugar, probably 5 pounds worth. Princely wedding gifts indeed. Herr Pauli and the widow were astounded. The widow dashed off to the kitchen cupboard to squirrel away the presents. Herr Pauli and the Major had a friendly smoke, and I sat there brooding. By no means could it be said that the Major is raping me. One cold word, and he'd probably go his way and never come back. So I am placing myself at his service of my own accord. Am I doing it because I like him, or out of a need for love? God forbid. For the moment I've had it up to here with men and their male desire. I can't imagine ever longing for any of that again. Am I doing it for bacon, butter, sugar, candles, canned meat? To some extent I'm sure I am. I didn't like having to sponge off the widow. I'm happy to be able to give her something of mine, through the Major, of course. That way I feel more independent, can eat with a cleaner conscience. In addition, I like the Major, and the less he wants from me as a man, the more I like him as a person. And he won't be wanting much, I can tell. His face is pale. His knee wound is causing him trouble. He's probably not so much after sexual contact as human companionship, female company, and I'm more than willing to give him that. For out of all the male beasts I've seen these past few days, he's the most bearable, the best of the lot. Moreover, I can actually control him, something I didn't dare do with Anatole. Not that easily, though Anatole was extremely good-natured with me. But he was so avid, such a bull, so strong. Without meaning to, he might give me a little box on the ear, and I'd end up spitting out a tooth, just like that, from sheer excess of strength, sheer bearishness. But I can actually talk with the Major, which still isn't an answer to the question of whether I should now call myself a whore, since I am essentially living off my body, trading it for something to eat. On the other hand, writing this makes me wonder why I'm being so moralistic and acting as if prostitution were so much beneath my dignity. After all, it's an old, venerable line of work, practised in the highest social circles. Actually, I've had only one conversation with a bona fide member of the profession. It was on a ship in the Mediterranean, not far off the coast of Africa. I had got up very early and was wandering the deck as the sailors were scrubbing the planks. Another woman was up as well, someone I didn't recognize. She was plump, modestly dressed, and smoking a cigarette. I joined her at the railing and started a conversation. She knew a little English and addressed me as Miss. Smiling, she offered me a cigarette. Later, the head steward informed me in a dramatic whisper that the woman was a bad person, that they'd had to take her along but only let her on deck early in the morning before the passengers were usually up. I never saw her again, but I can still see her plump, friendly, female face. What is that supposed to mean, anyway? A bad person? But morality aside, could I actually slip into that profession and still be pleased with myself? No, never. It goes against my nature. It wounds my self-esteem, destroys my pride, and physically it makes me miserable. So there's no need to worry. I'll be overjoyed to get out of this line of work, if that's what I have to call my present activity, as soon as I can earn my bread in some more pleasant way, better suited to my pride. Around 10 p.m. the Major deposits his Uzbek in the room behind the kitchen. Then once again a belt rattles against the bedpost, a revolver dangles down, a soldier's cap crowns the post. But the candle goes on burning, and we talk at length. That is, the Major talks, telling me about his family, and showing me some small snapshots he carries in his wallet. There's one of his mother, who has wild, slanting black eyes against a white head of hair. She comes from the south of the country, where the Tartars settled ages ago. She married an ash-blonde Siberian. Judging by appearance, the Major takes after his mother, but now I realize that his general demeanour comes from this mix of northern and southern temperaments. His mercurial character, the alternation of speed and gravity, of fire and melancholy, the lyrical upswings and the sudden dark moods that follow. He was married, but divorced a long time ago. He himself admits he was a difficult partner. No children, which is unusual for a Russian. I know this because they always ask if I have any, then shake their heads in wonder, amazed that there are so few children here and so many childless women. They also have a hard time accepting the fact that the widow has no children. The Major shows me one more photo, of a good-looking girl with scrupulously parted hair, the daughter of a Polish professor in whose house the Major was billeted last winter. He starts to grill me about my own situation, but I answer evasively. I don't want to talk about that. Then he wants to know about my schooling, and is full of respect when I tell him about the gymnasium and the languages I speak and my travels all across Europe. "You have good qualifications," he says appreciatively. Then all of a sudden he wonders why German girls are all so slender, with no fat. Had we really had that little to eat? And after that he starts going on about what it would be like if he took me back to Russia, if I were his wife, if I could meet his parents. He promises to fatten me up with chicken and cream. They used to live very well at his home before the war. I let him go on fantasizing. It's clear how impressed he is by my education, though admittedly his Russian standards are pretty modest. My schooling makes me desirable in his eyes. That's a far cry from our German men, for whom being well-read does little to enhance a woman's appeal, at least in my experience. In fact, my instinct has always been to play down my intelligence for them, to make a pretence of ignorance, or at least to keep quiet until I know them better. A German man always wants to be smarter, always wants to be in a position to teach his little woman. But that's something Soviet men don't know about, the idea of the little woman tending her cosy home. In the Soviet Union, education is highly valued. It's so rare, so sought after, and so much in demand that it has a special aura, particularly with the authorities. It also brings special pay, which is what the Major is getting at when he explains to me that I would have no difficulty finding a qualified job in his homeland. Thank you very much. I know you mean well, but I've had my fill of the Russian brand of schooling. Too many. And as soon as they're finally over, I intend to reclaim the evenings for myself. Once again he's singing, quietly, melodically. I enjoy hearing it. He's upstanding, frank and clean. But he's also distant and alien and so unfinished, whereas we Westerners are old and experienced and tremendously clever. And now no more than dirt beneath their boots. All I remember about the night is that I slept deeply and soundly, that I even had nice dreams. It took me a long time to ferret the Russian word for dream out of the Major. I spent much of the morning trying to convey the concept some other way. Movies in the head, pictures when your eyes are closed, not real things in sleep. Another word missing from my soldier's dictionary. At 6 in the morning the Major knocked on the door of the back room for the Uzbek, but there was no reply. He called me over, anxious and upset, worried that something might have happened to the Asian, that he might have fainted or been attacked or even murdered. We both rattled the handle and knocked on the wooden panel. Nothing, not a sound. But it was clear that the key was still in the door. No one, not even the Uzbek, could sleep that soundly. I ran into the front room, shook the widow awake, and whispered our concerns in her ear. "Come on," she yawned. "He just wants to stay here alone and then try his luck with you himself." Herr Pauli makes frequent mention of the widow's feminine intuition and feminine wiles, but in this case I don't think she's right, and I just laugh at the idea. Finally the Major leaves, after repeated glances at his watch. A Russian make, as he proved to me when we first met by showing me the manufacturer's mark. Scarcely is he out of the door, but who appears in the hall, well-rested and smartly dressed, but Mr. Uzbek himself. He moves in my direction, looking at me with his swollen little eyes, now strangely clouded over, and pulls a pair of silk stockings from his coat pocket, still in their paper wrapping. He hands them to me, saying in broken Russian, "You want? I give to you? You understand me?" Clear as day, my chubby dear. I fling the front door wide open and show him out. "And now be gone," I say in German. He understands and saunters off, giving me a last reproachful look as he stuffs the stockings back in his pocket. One up for female intuition. At night, between Thursday, 3rd of May, and Friday, 4th of May. A little after 3 in the morning. Still dark. I'm all alone, in bed, writing by candlelight, a luxury I can afford because the Major has provided us with an ample supply of candles. All through Thursday, our apartment was bustling with activity. 3 of Anatole's men showed up without warning. They sat round the table, chewing the fat, raucous as ever, smoked, spat on the floor and mucked around with the gramophone. They couldn't get enough of the C&A Textile Company advertising jingle. When I asked, in a panic, about Anatole, they merely shrugged their shoulders, but hinted that he was likely to be back. Before I forget, the regimental baker reappeared, wearing his white smock, and repeated his stock question. Didn't I know of a girl for him? He'd give us flour, much flour. No, I don't know of a girl for the baker. The Drink-and-be-merry sisters are clearly spoken for by the officers. Stinchen is safely hidden away. Lately I haven't heard or seen a thing about either of the concierge's daughters. I assume they've found shelter somewhere. One of the 2 bakery sales girls has left us and is said to be in hiding in another basement. The other is being kept out of sight in the small room behind the shop, so the widow has learned, where they blocked the door with a large chest and covered up the window with Venetian blinds. It must be pretty dark and gloomy for her. In theory, that leaves the young woman who looks like a young man, 24 years old and lesbian. From what we've heard, she's managed to escape the Ivans up to now. She goes around in a grey suit with a belt and tie and a man's hat pulled down over her face. As it is, she's always worn her hair short at the back. So she slips right past the Russians, who think she's a man. They aren't familiar with such borderline types. She even goes for water and joins the queue at the pump, smoking a cigarette. Pauli keeps cracking jokes about her, how he hopes she gets a proper re-schooling, how it would be a good deed to send some of the boys her way. Petka, for instance, with his lumberjack paws. Slowly but surely, we're starting to view all the raping with a sense of humour. Gallows humour. We have ample rooms for doing so, too. As the woman with the scabby eczema discovered this morning, contrary to my prediction. She was on her way upstairs to visit some neighbours when 2 men jumped her and dragged her into one of the abandoned apartments. There she had to take it twice, or really 1.5 times, as she explained rather enigmatically. She told us that one of the men pointed to her cheek and asked if she had syphilis. The silly girl was so shocked at the idea that she just shook her head and shouted no. A little later she staggered into our apartment. It took a few minutes before she could speak. We revived her with a coffee cup full of burgundy. Finally she recovered, then grinned at us and said, "So that's what I've spent 7 years waiting for." That's how long she's been separated from her husband. She shuddered as she told us about the apartment they had dragged her into. "Does that place stink? They do their business anywhere and everywhere." Despite this, she's diligently learning Russian. She's got hold of a little dictionary and has been writing out words. Now she wants me to teach her the proper pronunciation. Her eczema is right in front of me. She's smeared it with some kind of salve. It looks like a piece of rotten cauliflower. But these days, I've become a good deal less squeamish than I used to be. We too consider the abandoned apartments fair game. We take whatever we need and steal whatever we can eat. I went to the apartment next door, where they've been using the kitchen sink as a toilet, among other things, and walked off with an armful of briquettes, a hammer, and 2 jars of cherry preserves. We're living well, and keeping the drone Pauli well-fed on his bed of pain, to the point where his cheeks are getting chubby. Towards evening, out of nowhere, Anatole bursts into our room, unexpected and practically forgotten. I'm terrified. My heart leaps into my throat. But Anatole laughs, puts his arm round me, doesn't appear to know anything about any major. It seems he really has been transferred to staff headquarters, since he's so well informed. He tells us that the centre of Berlin is in ruins, that Soviet flags are fluttering over the wreck of the Reichstag and on the Brandenburg Gate. He's been everywhere. Although he doesn't have any information about Adolf, he confirms that Goebbels killed himself along with his wife and all their children. Anatole heads to the gramophone, but no sooner does he touch the cover with his strong hands than it breaks into 5 pieces, leaving him standing there holding them, bewildered. Confused images, scraps, it's all mixed up in my brain. I can't keep it straight anymore. Another evening with lots of vodka, another night. Anxiously I keep one ear cocked, listening for the door, starting each time I hear a noise, a footstep. I'm afraid the Major might show up, but he doesn't. Maybe the surly lieutenant told him that Anatole was back. After all, the lieutenant also knows Anatole and his entourage. In any event, Anatole has heard a rumour about the Major and wants to know whether I brushed off his question, saying that we just talked about politics, and Anatole is satisfied, or at least he pretends to be. For his part, he assures me that he hasn't touched any girl in Berlin but me. Then he pulls out some mail from home. 14 letters, 13 of them addressed by women. He smiles bashfully, but acts as if the reason were completely obvious. What can I say? They all love me. Anatole was careless enough to let me know that he had to leave by 3 o'clock in the morning to get back to his new billet in the centre of the city, and that he probably wouldn't be coming back, so I tried to deprive him of as much time in bed as I could. I fussed over his letters one by one, asking as many questions as I could think of, getting him to tell me things, explain the map of Berlin, show me the progress of the front. I encouraged his men to drink and play records, asked them to sing, which they were happy to do, until Anatole kicked them out. In bed I stalled some more and finally told him, after he'd had his way once, that that was it for the moment. I was tired and exhausted and needed to rest. I gave him a sermon, told him I was sure he was no hooligan, but a considerate, refined man of tender feelings. He accepted it, though more than a little reluctantly, with occasional relapses into bullishness, which I managed to put a stop to. Naturally, I didn't sleep a wink. Even so, it finally turned 3, and Anatole had to leave. A friendly parting from the hot stallion, but then relief, a chance to stretch my legs. I stayed awake a while, since I had this idiotic feeling that I was being spied on, that everything I did was being reported, and that the Major would show up any second to take over. But so far no one has come. Now the rooster is crowing outside, and I want to sleep. Looking back on Friday, 4th of May, recorded on Saturday, 5th of May. The Major showed up around 11 a.m. He gathered that Anatole was back in the area, and wanted to know if I had... I said no, that Anatole had just brought his men over for fun and drink, but that he'd had to hurry back into town. The Major swallowed it. I felt rotten. Sooner or later they're going to bump into each other. What am I supposed to do? I'm nothing but booty, prey, that has to stand back and let the hunters decide what to do with their game, how to parcel it out. Still, I very much hope that Anatole won't be coming back. This time the Major brought all sorts of sweets, Luftwaffe provisions, concentrated foodstuffs. We ate some for dessert, just the 3 of us, because the Major couldn't stay long. He didn't know whether to laugh or get angry when I told him about his Uzbek and the offer of stockings. Finally he decided to laugh. He promised to return in the evening. There was an edge to his voice, and he gave me a sharp look. Now I'm not so sure that I can control him. I have to watch myself, and not forget that they're our masters. Herr Pauli and I are eating like there's no tomorrow, much to the annoyance of the widow. We spread our butter finger thick, are extravagant with the sugar, want our potatoes browned in fat. Meanwhile the widow is counting every one of those potatoes, and she's not entirely wrong to do so. Our small stockpile is dwindling. We probably have 1 more basketful of potatoes in the basement, but we can't get to it. A group of residents took advantage of the quiet hours between 5 and 7 in the morning and barricaded the entrance with a mountain of rubble, chairs, spring mattresses, chests and wooden beams, all lashed down with wire and rope. It would take hours to undo, and that's the whole point. No plunderer would have the patience. We won't dismantle it until afterwards, though no one can say when that will be. What a crazy day! Anatole turned up after all, in the afternoon, this time on the passenger seat of a motorcycle. He showed me the bike, which was waiting downstairs along with the driver. He claimed that this really was his last visit, that he was being transferred out of Berlin along with the general staff. Where to? He wouldn't say. Was it a German city? He just shrugged his shoulders and grinned. It's all the same to me. I only want to know for sure that he's going to be far away. The widow's greeting, amicable but measured. She sees things in terms of the larder and prefers the Major, who leaves more of a mark on her cupboard shelves. I sit with Anatole on the edge of the bed and have him tell me all about his motorcycle. He's very proud of it. The door is blocked by the usual chair. But suddenly it's pushed open, and Anatole looks up, annoyed. There's the widow, all red in the face, her hair dishevelled. She squeezes inside, pursued by a Russian. I recognise him as the handsome Pole from Lvov, with the head wound from Stalingrad and the special talent for getting enraged. He looks like he's on the verge of having a fit right now. He immediately starts shouting, appealing to me as well as Anatole, as referees. He's young. What's good for others is good for him too. It's been a long time since he had a woman. The widow's husband, meaning Herr Pauli, who's having his afternoon nap in the next room, doesn't need to know anything. It won't take long at all. His eyes flash, he waves his fists, his hair is flying. He seems utterly convinced that the widow is his by right. Her bits of field-hand Polish must have lodged in his ear and struck a chord in his heart. He even tries some on her now, tosses a few Polish words her way, all the while greatly agitated. The widow keeps wiping away the tears that are streaming down her face. Anatole looks at me, then at the widow. It's clear he doesn't want to have anything to do with this. He turns to me, saying it isn't such a big deal. I should talk to the widow. Everything will soon be over. She shouldn't be making trouble for herself. Then back to the Pole, waving him away. Kindly leave me out of it. I'm in a hurry. I have to go soon. And he makes as if to shove the chair back against the door. I whisper a few quick words to the widow, remind her of the head wound, the Pole's tantrums. The man is capable of doing anything, goes crazy if he doesn't get his way. Anatole will soon be gone, and won't be able to help. Or does she want to wake Herr Pauli, so he can take care of the frenzied man from Lvov? She dismisses that idea. No, what for? And she cries. The Pole, once again calm, strokes her. Then they both disappear. A quarter of an hour later the motorcycle rattles off with Anatole on the passenger seat. He looks back up at the apartment, sees me by the window, and gives a lively wave. Then the bike vanishes round the corner. The widow was angry, and didn't speak to me the whole afternoon. In the evening, though, she told me what happened. Apparently the young devil turned out to be so tame and docile, he was downright boring by the time he let her go. It seems he left her with a compliment. At first she didn't want to reveal it, but finally she told us, "Ukrainian woman, like this. You, like this." The first like this he illustrated with a circle formed by both his thumbs and forefingers, the second like this with a single thumb and forefinger. What else did the day bring? Another stair victim. Once again an older woman, about 60. The younger ones don't dare venture into the stairwell by day. This time it was one of the 3 dressmakers, the Black Pudding sisters. They'd heard that Anatole's men had vacated their apartment, so they made their way into the abandoned rooms, escorted by our deserter. Together they fished a sewing machine out of the trash and general clutter, and lugged it up 2 flights of stairs. Then one of the aunties went back down by herself to salvage some other sewing equipment, and ran right into the hands of a Russian. When the widow spoke with her, it was nearly evening, and the dressmaker was still sobbing on the sofa in the bookseller's apartment, surrounded by a whole bevy of women moaning and groaning. They got hold of the concierge's youngest daughter as well, her mother told me today at the pump. At first the whole family, mother, 2 daughters, and the 3-year-old grandson, had stayed hidden in the basement next door, which was well secured. But once people started saying that things were a little better with the Russians, the girls went back to their apartment on the 1st floor to cook and do their wash. That's where 2 drunken, singing heroes caught them by surprise. According to the mother, they left the older sister alone. I've seen the girl in the meantime, and I can understand why. She looks clinically emaciated, and her face is so small, her cheeks so hollow, that the outline of her skull shows through. Her mother whispered to me that the younger daughter had barricaded herself with cotton wool, though there was no real reason to, but the girls had heard that the Russians don't like women at that time of month. It didn't help. The men just howled with laughter as they tossed the stuff around the room, and then took the 16-year-old on the chaise longue in the kitchen. "She's doing well so far," her mother said, herself amazed. Even so, just to be safe, she took her daughter up to the bookseller's, where the widow says she's been boasting to everyone how the Russians went straight for her without giving her older sister even a second glance. One more person came to say goodbye. Andrei, the schoolteacher from Anatole's group with the icy blue eyes. He sat with me a while at the table, talked about politics in his quiet, composed voice, gave me a lecture full of words like socialisticheski, kapitalisticheski, ekonomicheski. I listened quietly, mending my one and only towel and patching my violated garter. We're starting to see a semblance of order again. That evening we sat by Herr Pauli's bed, the widow, the deserter's wife, and me, by candlelight. We gave the deserter's wife one of our candles. She let us have a box of matches. The Major showed up right on time, along with his chubby Uzbek shadow. He played on his little harmonica, a plundered German Hohner, wildly and full of fire. He even wound up asking his orderly to help him out of his soft leather boots, and danced a Krakowiak in his socks, swinging his hips gracefully and lithely, fully aware of his talent too. Then he danced a tango with the widow, while the rest of us sang a popular hit. After that he played some more, this time from Rigoletto and Il Trovatore. It's amazing the music he can get out of that tiny mouth organ. His Uzbek didn't take his pitch-black Mongol eyes off him for a second, and every now and then he'd voice his admiration in childlike, awkward Russian. "Oh, he is good! No one else like that!" Finally, the Uzbek let the Major talk him into singing an Uzbek song. Very nasal, very strange. After endless begging, he also agreed to dance on his chunky legs. The deserter's wife, a tough Berlin woman, drank the Major's wine and received his ceremonial bows. While he was dancing with the widow, our guest whispered to me, "Well, for him I could flat out forget myself." The Major stayed. A difficult night. His knee had swollen up from all the dancing and caused him a lot of pain. He groaned every time he moved. I scarcely dared stir. He left me alone completely. I slept deeply. Saturday, 5th of May, 1945. The May sky is dreary today. The cold doesn't want to go away. I sit hunched on the stool in front of our stove, which is barely kept burning with all sorts of Nazi literature. Assuming everyone is doing the same thing, and they are, Mein Kampf will go back to being a rare book, a collector's item. I just polished off a pan of cracklings, and am giving myself a thick spread of butter, while the widow paints a black picture of my future. I pay no attention to her. I don't care about tomorrow. I just want to live as well as I can for now, otherwise I'll collapse like a wet rag, given our recent way of life. My face in the mirror is round again. Today, the three of us discussed the future. In his mind, Herr Pauli is already settling back at his desk at the metalworks. He forecasts a huge upturn in the economy with the help of our conquerors. The widow wonders whether she could land a job there herself as a cook in the factory cafeteria. She's pessimistic about the modest annuity from her deceased husband's insurance and is afraid she'll have to look for work. And me? Well, at least I've studied a number of things. I'm sure I'll find something. I'm not afraid. I'll just sail blindly ahead, trusting my little ship to the currents of the times. Up to now it's always managed to carry me to green shores. But our country is despondent. Our people are in pain. We've been led by criminals and gamblers, and we've let them lead us like sheep to the slaughter. And now the people are miserable, smouldering with hate. No tree is high enough for him, I heard someone say of Adolf this morning at the pump. A number of men showed up in the afternoon, German men this time, from our own building. It felt very strange, once again being around men